I'm Courtney Boyce.
I'm Derek Olthius, and you're listening to the Drop Jaw Podcast.
Boom!
With flies, especially right during ice off, you could probably go find one of your kids' dinosaur toys and throw a hook on it and throw it out there.
I mean, those big fish, like you said, they got big for a reason, and more often than not, you walk away with your tail tucked between your legs.
Oh, yeah.
And you just got to salute him.
So you're going for it, and you're ready to do your final cast, and you put all this energy into that forward cast. You let it go, you release the line from your haul, and all of a sudden you hear this oh! And you know exactly what just happened, and it is no fun. Stick 'em solid.
Welcome to the Drop Jaw Flies podcast, your source for fly fishing talk, tips, and stories. In this episode, we discuss spring streamer fishing. Springtime and ice off is a great time to throw streamers, and we talk about it. We also talk gear, line, leader, and tippet needed for spring streamer fishing. And we also discuss floating line versus sinking, and when you might use both. We love to hear your feedback. If you have a topic you'd like us to discuss on a future podcast, let us know. Please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, or our YouTube channel. I am Chad Nelson along with my co-host, Jason RV. Here is today's podcast.
All right, Jason, let's jump into it, man. So a couple mailbox questions that have come in lately asking how we approach spring streamer fishing. And I thought, let's record this one today because we're just coming out of our spring season. We're at the tail end of it here. It's fresh on our mind. And so let's talk about maybe what we've learned, what things have been reinforced in regards to chucking streamers and chasing fish in the spring.
Ooh, that's a really good one, man. It's so exciting. It's a super exciting time because you've been kind of cooped up for most of the winter, and as soon as the ice starts to come off some of the lakes, I mean, you're able to get out on the rivers here and there throughout the winter, but as soon as spring starts to approach and the temperatures climb up, we are thinking about hitting our favorite lakes and reservoirs, and there's a couple things that we need to do to get ready for that, but it's an exciting time.
Oh, man, absolutely. Like you said, everybody's antsy. You are anxious to get out there and chase fish. You know they're hungry. And I think the reason a lot of guys are asking the question is they know or they've heard that spring is a great time to chuck streamers, but not everybody fishes streamers. So a few of the questions that came into us are guys wanting to give it a try, guys that didn't have a lot of experience with it. So let's talk about it, what we've learned, what we know. But first, let's talk about spring in general, the conditions, what's unique, what's different about spring, and then we can get into how we approach it.
Yeah, so spring is an interesting time of year because of the water temperature. It is still very, very cold. I mean, when there's ice still on top of the lake, that water right next to the ice is going to be 32.5 degrees, maybe. It's cold. And so the fish are still pretty lethargic, and they've seen, especially in Utah, I don't know about other places in the West, generally there's ice fishing. And those fish have seen a lot of the vertical presentation, just the small presentation of bait, lures, flies, that go down through the hole. And so my thought is, as soon as the ice comes off and they see a presentation that drops off the ice and starts to swim
horizontally,
that is something new that they haven't seen for a while, and that it does trigger them to bite and to chase that lure and to eat it. They still are capable of bursts of speed. It's not like, oh, I'm so slow and cold, I can't. That's not the case. They are eating all through the winter. It's not like they don't eat when they're under the ice. They're hunting. They're still looking for food, but they're just not as their metabolism is so slow, because of the water that they're just not as active. But I think my observation is when you approach the ice and you make your cast close to it, as soon as they see that fly going horizontally, they're curious and they're going to check it out.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we had, at least I did, several hits where they hit hard and they chased hard. And I was like, holy smokes, you kind of expect these things to be lethargic because the water's so cold. They're not quite warmed up yet, but they see a big, tasty morsel, something that's tempting, or they decide they're going to eat it, and they do hit hard.
Yeah. So in the context of right now, Chad, we're in first week of May, second week of May. But if we go back maybe a month, and sometimes ice off is different year to year. So this information is not going to be as pertinent right now as it would have been maybe a month ago. But when the ice was barely starting to come off, what we were looking for was water, a depth of maybe 4 feet. And when the ice is only maybe 40 feet from the shore, depending on the shoreline and the depth of that water underneath the ice, you're going to need to find some depth if you can. You're not going to find fish probably in that 1, 2 to 3 feet of water because that water is cold and the fish just don't like that. So if you can get 4 feet or deeper that time of year, that's what we were looking for. And we found it that day, right? The very first day that we found open water, we found that little shelf.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll go ahead. And Chad's stripping like a maniac, making the perfect cast, and all of a sudden, bam! He's like, "Fish on!" And our season had started, so it was awesome.
Well, there's days when you can get into them. You got a pot of fish come through, or at an ice off, you find hungry fish. Man, you can feel like a pro because you're just getting slammed left and right, and it's like you can't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
And then you go out the next day and you're humbled because you can't do anything right. But
And it is funny. Yeah, the fish are ranging all over the place. And I would say the first thing that you need to do is not really locate the fish. That's hard to do. What you have to do is locate water that the fish are going to be in. And it's generally, if it's really cold still, it's going to be in that 4 feet or deeper. And most of our fish were coming out of the 10, 12, even deeper, because they're still in that water where it's warmer than right up close to where the ice is. But yeah, sometimes they are just right under the ice later in the day when it's a little warmer.
Well, yeah, you certainly have to pay attention to the conditions, meaning the weather conditions. And spring is notorious for inclement weather. I mean, one day here in Utah, it'll warm up to 65, even 70 degrees. You get that for a few days in a row, the fish start coming in closer.
Yeah.
We would find 1 or 2 areas where there's bait fish. They'd come in, and Jason chucked a streamer out, and 3 seconds later, bam, hit, fish on. But then you get a cold snap for 3 or 4 days, and that water chills, and the fish go deeper.
Turn around and go right back out to the depths.
It's a 180, yeah.
And that's just what you have to look forward to in spring.
So when we get into gear, I mean, we can talk about line and what you need, but in the spring, you got to pack both a floating and maybe an intermediate or even full sinking line, just depending.
Yeah, so let's talk about that since you just brought it up, Chad. Here we go with flies, especially right during ice off. You could probably go find one of your kids' dinosaur toys and throw a hook on it and throw it out there. And the fish, you see it moving, they're probably going to go check it out. I would say fly selection can be really key if there's a lot of food items that are the same and the fish are keen on them. Leeches, sow bugs, small bait fish, or if those haven't showed up yet, then throw on something really big too, and they're probably going to eat it. But line choice is really something that I pay attention to right here, because here we go. Here's what you got to do in the spring is, if the fish are deeper, than a floating line with a longer leader and a weighted fly to get you down to the depth where the fish are. I like floating lines for this because eventually your fly is going to stop sinking, and you can pull it very slowly if that's what the fish want, and it'll stay in that spot. If you need to go deeper, put your intermediate on, and that'll get you down to where you need to be, and you can still do a slow presentation. If for some reason you need to go deeper than that and you don't want to wait half the day for your fly to get down, then you would put your type 3 sinking line on. But the problem with the faster sinking lines is you have to pull them quicker through the water column so your fly doesn't hang up, and that fast retrieve the fish just might not chase that. So you got to strike the balance. You got to find out about where the fish are and what's their tolerance for chasing. Is it going to be fast pulls but really short, or is it going to be long, slow? You've got to figure that out.
Yeah. I would say in general, though, you and I this past spring, we had more success with the medium to slower stripping speed retrieve.
Yeah.
And again, it's just cold water. Fish aren't as active, in generally speaking.
Right. So if they are out deep, and it's with floating line, you might have to lengthen your leader and put a weighted fly on to get down there. But when the fly gets to that depth, you're going to be able to pull it so slowly, and you're probably going to get a hookup. It's an easy meal. Fish can catch just about anything they want to, but it's that want to. You have to figure out what do they want. What's the size, the profile of the fly that they'll take, and the speed of the retrieve once you've found the depth.
Yeah. And then, Jason, talk about quality of fly line. I think your and my biggest frustration this spring, fishing in the cold conditions. Some days it's snowing. Some days we got hail. The water was dang cold. We were fishing with ice on the water. And our biggest frustration was our fly line tangling, getting knotted up. It's cold conditions. So talk about that briefly.
Yeah, fly line with your intermediate, especially with any of your lines that are clear, they're going to have a monofilament core, or just a straight piece of clear mono that has a tendency to have memory that can coil up on you, even though they say it's for cold water. That's frustrating, man. And even some of your floating line acts different when the temperatures are freezing or below, and it's kind of a pain to deal with that. Stripping basket is super handy, which we'll be breaking something out in the next. It might be hopefully in a year, maybe 2, but we're going to tackle that issue. So that can be really handy. But lines, it's helpful to bring a couple different lines. I know they're expensive, but lines is what's going to get you fish.
Oh, man. Can't emphasize that enough, the importance of quality fly line, because so frustrating some days.
Really frustrating. It needs to be able to cast and carry what you want to throw, or what the fish want, and it needs to be able to do that without coiling up and knotting in tons of different knots. When you shoot it, especially, and it's so frustrating when you see a fish, or that there's a fish in the area where you're going to cast, and you make a cast and it just knots up all over the place. That bugs me really bad.
Yeah, bad words sometimes fly.
And even the best fly line makers, we have them all. We used them with the exception of the air. Well, I even used an airflow line this spring.
Well, and that was just it too. I mean, we've been testing out several different fly lines over the last 6 months, and so Some we thought maybe weren't ideal for the conditions we were fishing, and we found out they weren't. But okay, Jason, let's talk about how you approach it. We spent a few days out on the Green River this spring. Does fishing rivers in the spring versus summer, do your tactics vary at all?
Yeah, it just depends on from spring to summer, Will, obviously, because again, the fish are going to be less active in the colder water than they are in the warmer water, up to a point. Once water starts to get up past 70 degrees, then it's, go home or go for a hike or something. It's really not good to catch fish in 70 to above, especially above that. It's just too much stress for them. But early spring wet, like on a tailwater, so on the Green River, so much different than the freestone rivers. The water is going to be a little bit warmer in the tailwater. So tons of insects are available as well to the fish, midges and betas. And with your streamer fishing, you're going to slow it down a little bit. And sometimes you get away with a lot bigger fly in the winter too. Or I would say late winter.
Gotcha.
Late winter, throw on something huge and see what happens. Yeah, there's a lot of different things, and it's hard to fit it all into one podcast.
For sure.
I mean, that's just such a big topic to, we could throw in some general answers to that, but there are differences, and you do need to change things up depending on the season.
Yeah.
Water flow, light.
Yeah. And we kind of covered some of that in a previous podcast titled Streamer Fishing and episode 5, More Streamer Fishing.
Yeah.
We get into rivers and tactics there.
But like what's going on right now, and maybe what would help guys now at their favorite lake or river, is that the presentation and what they're throwing. So the line that you need to use, we just kind of went through that briefly. Leaders is something too. You got to have a leader that's going to get your fly where you want it to go, and then drop down to the level of the fish. So leader has to do a couple different things there. And then flies. Everybody wants to know, what flies do you guys use on your reservoir? What's your favorite fly, Chad, on our reservoir? We fish.
Baby whitey, all the way. Although we've been trying out some new patterns with our mini trout head, which I love also. Mixing up the color patterns a little bit of purple flash in there, a little bit of a copper amber color. And I had one day, I just killed it on that. With baby whitey, yes, Jason's holding up one with a chartreuse eye and a little bit of green in there. That chartreuse color was money this spring. A little bit of murky water. Those fish were just hammering that fly.
Well, yeah. Where we fish, there are red side shiners, and this is a good imitation profile of that bait fish that's in our reservoir. So that's why we use it. I would also, guys, not be without black woolly buggers in ice-off conditions or early spring, because it's a high contrast color and it looks like one of their favorite food items, which is a leech and the little bait fish that hatch out too. Those are like, don't go to a lake without black woolly buggers in the spring. Always have some.
Yeah, absolutely. So that day we saw some bait fish. They were super dark color, darker than you and I remembered seeing. And I had been fishing baby whitey, but it was a lighter color. So I tied on a black woolly bugger, and that thing got hammered and hammered and hammered for 2 hours straight.
Yeah, that was awesome.
So, and again, that's one of our top 10 flies, must have, always in the fly box. Don't leave home without it.
Yeah, it's just it works in the rivers, lakes, and it imitates so many different food items that it's a no-brainer. You should always have it. Simple to tie, and have a dozen of them. This one, is so fun because, like we've discussed before, this is the Juvenile Trout Fly, and it's a big profile. And sometimes your bigger fish just are interested in this, and it's fun to cast and see what happens. So you're going to have a range of flies, depending on size. This covers our biggest. We do have the mini trout, which I don't have out right now. That's the medium, the mini trout is. And then you got baby whitey's going to go on our smaller profile. And then, of course, when we go smaller than that, it's going to be in our woolly bugger size. So to cover all the size gamuts, size is super important. I really don't think fish identify exactly with the food items that they eat on day in and day out with the fly that you're throwing. I don't think they look over at the real thing and then over at your fly and compare it. But size can be an issue, and so can color. Mm-hmm. And if it moves like what they normally see, then you've got it, man.
Yeah, and I think we could say, Jason, generally speaking, again, the sunny day, use bright colors, cloudy skies, dark days, use a dark color. In general, that's kind of what we went with, and we found success.
Yeah, it's always a good rule to follow. There's always exceptions to the rule, and sometimes you'll catch a fish on something that normally traditionally doesn't work in the light or in the dark, and sometimes they'll work that way.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you and I are always trying to not really buck the trend, but seeing really how effective our flies are in all conditions. And certainly we've caught fish with dark colored streamers on bright sunny days and vice versa.
Yeah. So what we'll do tomorrow, the ice is all off. What we're going to look for tomorrow are places that the sun is going to be on the water for the majority of the day. So we'll probably be on the north side where the sun shines down the banks that are on the north. If you go on the south and there's a mountain right there on the south side of the bank, the sun can't really get to that shoreline very easy. Mm-hmm. So what we're looking for tomorrow, or what you guys would want to look for too, is water that gets the sun on it a lot. In this early springtime when the water's cold, you actually want sunny days because that's going to warm the water up and get everything moving. So we're going to go to where the water is going to be the sun's going to be on the water the majority of the day. Best bite's probably going to be in that middle to late afternoon, but we're going to go early just to get set up and do some scouting. But I wouldn't expect the fishing to be hot until the sun's been on the water for a while this time of year. So you want to look for that, guys, is water that's going to warm up the quickest.
Yeah, for sure. So, Jason, let's go back a few weeks. We went up to our favorite reservoir. Still ice on the reservoir. It was out 30, 40, 50 feet in some areas. How do you approach that? So for guys next year fishing an ice off, how do you approach it when there's still ice on the water, but you're finding pockets of open?
Yeah, what you want to try and do is find usually the deepest water you can, because the fish just aren't going to be up right on the bank usually, unless it's deep, because that water down lower is still warmer than up by the ice. So try and find the best water that you can, and then you'll cast as far out as you can, and then if you can get it on the ice and pull it off, great. But once you do that, there's probably going to be fish nearby, and then it's going to be up to your fly and the retrieval speed. It's going to tell you, the fish are going to tell you, exactly what you need to change. So let's say for most guys, if they want to use our baby whitey, they're going to cast over to the ice. They're going to let it sink, but anytime your fly is in the water, it's game on, and it can be hit when it's sitting still. It can be hit, in between pulls a lot of the time. So don't cast it out there. And if you want it to sink, don't forget about it. And, I'm not gonna strip yet. So I'm thinking about the NBA finals or something. Don't do that. As soon as that water hits the fly hits the water, you're playing, and it can at any time. So try and get as much slack out as you can and be ready for a strike, especially after that first strip. If it hasn't been hit when it's sinking, that first strip, stop. Fish can be right there on it. It was just there looking at it. When it moved, it was like, whoa, I'm getting this thing. So if you don't get anything off that first strip, I would pull it kind of quickly. Boom, 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 boom. See if anything happens. If not, and follow it all the way up to where you can see it. Make sure there's not a fish behind it, because sometimes the fish are just lethargic and they'll just follow it all the way to your feet sometimes. If you do see a fish there, let it hover for a second or two, and sometimes the fish will eat it right there at your feet. You don't see a fish, you don't get hit, throw it out to that same spot again. Maybe let it sink a couple seconds longer and slow your strip after that. What we're trying to do is just establish what the fish wants at this point. If you repeat that and let it sink down a little bit farther, because maybe the fish just don't want to come up or they're not there. If you do that 3 times and maybe you move to a different location and you do the same 3 steps, probably a good time to change your fly out at that point. Because changes is what's important at that time. When we go out, I pretty much know fish are going to eat this, so I don't change up very often. What I'm looking for is where they're at and how they want this. It's very rare that we don't get a bite on or a strike on whitey. And so I don't really have to, find out what fly they're going to eat, because they'll eat that. You just need to find out how they want it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing you said, Jason, was key in regards to the retrieve. Several times I remember you saw a fish, you had a chaser. He was coming in. He followed your fly all the way almost to your feet. We're fishing from shore. But you kept your fly there hovering, almost one time bouncing it up and down, and you got a take. 3 or 4 times that happened, and those fish were so lethargic. It wasn't a hard chase in those cases. He followed it all the way in, and fortunately you were watching and saw what was going on.
Yeah, and I noticed we both do that now, and I know I've known about it for a while. A lot of guys will see the fish coming, but it doesn't hit their fly, so they just pull it out of the water and then they try and recast to it, and then when water slams in the water again, the fish take off. So what you can do, your rod's 9 feet, you can keep it out there and let it hover, let it sit there, and the fish, I don't know what they think, but it's an easy meal. They followed it, now it's just there, and a lot of times they'll just eat it right there.
Yeah. Well, I do that now after I learned that lesson the hard way, because I pulled my fly out a few times too soon, and there was a fish right there. I just wasn't paying attention, I guess. I was looking at the mountains, watching the eagles fly. I don't know what I was doing.
Yeah, that works great for when the water's really cold. The fish are still lethargic. So now the water's warmed up a little bit. All the ice is gone, and so it's a good thing maybe when I start out now is to look for those points, look on points, drop-offs. You go out to a point, the water gradually slides off, but around the point, the water gets deeper, and I'll fish all the way around that point in both directions, just to see what's going to happen for that day when we start. And I'll start off with a faster strip to see if the fish are on it. Usually in the morning when we start, water's still a little bit cooler, and so I'll only do a fast strip maybe once or twice, and then I'll start going as we drop down in the water column to find the fish, slow the retrieve down until we figure out about how deep they are, and how fast they want to fly. So here's the other thing, Chad, that people need to do is when they make their first cast, they can start pulling right away. If they want to just try that very first top layer of water. Fish, maybe if they're in 1 to 3 feet, they see something above them, they'll go up and get it. So that 1 to 3 feet, you could start out with a fast retrieve if you want to and just see what happens. If not, make your second cast. 1, 2, 3, depending on how fast your fly sinks.
Yeah.
Or your fly line. And then just start searching. Keep counting so you know about where you are at in the water column. And then, do your different retrieves to find out what the fish want. It's a game you play all day long because things change during the day. I mean, there's not one strip usually that works all throughout the day. So you got to vary it up.
Yeah, you do. You just got to mess around with it and see what the fish want that day. You just never know. That's why you need to plan on fishing from sun up to sundown. You need that whole day.
Yeah, if you can, I would definitely do the whole day. This early spring, Chad, if you go out later in the day, it'll be more pleasant and the water will be warmer. If you go out really early, unless you know like some secret hole where the fish are biting when it's still really cold, it'd be better for you to this time of year to plan your trips later in the afternoon until dark.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you and I went up early some mornings, and we got up to our reservoir, and it was 32 degrees. I mean, it was dang cold. And the fish just aren't going to be that active.
Yeah, plan on fishing deep water usually in early spring, late winter, if.
Yeah, for sure. Jason, do you vary your leader length at all in the spring?
It depends on which line I have on. If I want to go floating line, then I will make my leader a lot longer because I'm usually going to throw a smaller pattern, but I want it to be weighted. If you get your longer leader, it'll go down deeper.
Right.
Off floating line. So that I will do that. That depends on the depth of the fish too. Sometimes later on in the summer, early in the morning, they'll be like in 1 foot of water, and so you just floating line's great with a short leader. No problem.
Yeah.
But this time of year, I'm going to keep it about 6 feet.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is a lot longer than most people do for a lake. You got clear intermediate line, which is what I love. A 6 foot, even sometimes longer, and super clear water is. I will vary that up, and I have some stuff here, Chad. I have some material if people want to see how we do our leader. But you'd have to get on YouTube to see it, guys.
Yeah, we could maybe do a separate YouTube video for that later.
Yeah.
Just so we don't bore our audience that's listening on iTunes or Podbean or Stitcher. But so, Jason, let's talk gear real quick. I'd referenced inclement weather in spring earlier, and that is at least so true here in the Intermountain West. I mean, we typically have our backpacks packed to the hilt because you can head out in the morning, like I said, and it's 32 degrees, and by midday it could be 60, 70 degrees, and you're fishing in a T-shirt.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to really be selective in the gear that you take. I mean, 1 minute we're getting sunburned, the next we're getting rained on.
Well, Chad, for you, what is the most important item other than your fly fishing gear that you take with you? And we're talking about going into the backcountry, folks. That's why. That's where we've been fishing, kind of, in the backcountry. And I want Chad to kind of spill the beans on what he thinks or what he takes and thinks is most essential for a good trip. I
take you because your pack is so full with crap and everything. I don't need anything else.
That's kind of what I'm thinking about your pack too. If I don't have it, Chad does. So we can. Well, you're fishing for a day, but you got to be prepared for like a 2 week. In my mind, I'm thinking we're getting old, Chad. We're going to roll our ankle, break our knee, one of us is, and we're not going to be able to pack each other out. So we're going to have to wait to be discovered.
Yeah, just put a bullet in me and leave me. No,
Well,
we kind of covered this on an earlier podcast. I think it was our cold weather fishing podcast. And we went through a top 10. And, for these kind of conditions, there really is a top 10. And I'm talking, headlamp, fire starter. We bring water, obviously, a first aid kit. But then, your clothing, too. You got to pack a beanie, an insulation layer, and then your outer layer, which is also a rain jacket.
Yeah. Yeah, man, if you're in the backcountry and it rains and you're stranded overnight, then you don't want to be soaking wet. So having, like you said, all those intermediate layers plus a rain protection, usually guys are in their waders and they do have their a raincoat or whatever, which is super important. I love gloves. Can make or break a fishing trip, and you and I both have experienced this.
Yes.
And we have, starting from last, I don't know when it was, late fall, we got the Sims steelhead glove.
The Skeena.
The Skeena glove.
Yeah.
And that is a tight-fitting, kind of a thin, but has fleece inside of the rubber, neoprene, and man, we've loved those.
Yeah, on that cold weather podcast, we had dress gloves and we both packed 2 or 3 pair. And I had said, I'd been on a search for the perfect fishing glove and I hadn't found them yet. And that podcast predated when we found these Skeena gloves, and they've been a game changer, like you said. I think they're the closest to perfect fishing gloves for cold weather conditions that we have found.
Yeah, no, I've been through them all. We've both tried out a bunch of gloves before that, but when you're casting these big heavy flies, you need a really good grip on your fly rod, or your wrist and your hand gets really tired, so does your forearm. And these gloves are such a low profile that you can grab onto your grip on your rod and actually make great casts and not be that tired. Reach into the water when you need to. Your hands don't get wet, and you still have enough grip to grab the fly and pull it out, and they don't take the slime off the fish, not like any of the other material in other gloves. And as for right now, that's our favorite glove.
Yeah.
The
only complaint I would say I have is my hands tend to sweat a little bit, and if you don't turn your gloves inside out and let them air out once in a while, you're going to have some stinky hands.
Great tip, Chad. My gloves are going to be thrown away in just not very long because I failed to do that.
Well,
and it's to the point where we don't need them now.
I wasn't going to call you out, but since you admitted to it, it was you I'm talking about. These gloves do have a little micro fleece lining, so slightly insulated, tight-fitting rubber gloves. They're great.
Yeah, to be fair, we were going to try out the cast because we've heard great things about their glove too, and we just didn't get to it this year. So maybe next year we'll be able to try their glove out. I really like their other apparel, and I wear that quite often.
Yeah. The other thing I'd say, Jason, talking lessons learned or whatever, is most days in the spring I would fish in waders. There's a couple days I opted to go with the muck boots versus the waders, and I'd wished I'd gone with the waders instead. Again, just with the inclement weather, being able to get into muddy places. Spring is a muddy time. Ice melting, runoff. So I would just opt to go with the waders.
Great point, especially when you're fishing the reservoir or a lake and you're trumping around the perimeter of the lake. There's all kinds of mushy areas, muddy areas, areas where you can sink up to, and that happens.
Yep.
So waders is a good thing. Usually on a river, you're going to be in waders, but on a lake, you can kind of go, hey, make a decision. I'm going to be in my hiking boots or your muck boots, like you just said. Waders is probably the safest, especially early spring.
Yeah, that one day I did I did sink right up to my crotch. I'm in my muck boots and pants, and it was just mushy. Take one step, boom. I had to have Jason rescue me, pull me out of the mud. I was so muddy, I had to take a bath in the creek in the ice cold water to get that cakey mud off, and it wasn't fun.
lessons. Yeah, fun adventure in the springtime.
Yeah.
And you can hike through anything. You're a mule, man. That was a bad area.
That was bad. The more I moved, the more I was sinking. It felt almost like quicksand. Now, had I been alone, I think I could have got out, but I would have had to roll around in the mud like a pig, and it just wouldn't have been a good situation.
Yeah. Be careful out there and go with a buddy. That buddy system is a good thing to have. If you're going to go exploring and do kind of an adventure trip, it's always good to go with somebody or let people know where you're going to go and, your approximate route. But Chad, back to gear really quick. I don't want people to think we forgot about that. You and I, minimum, we take a six weight with us, but usually we fish 8s all day long. And that is because we can throw really big flies and we can throw baby whitey and woolly buggers with the 8, and it helps to get through the wind. Mm-hmm. 10 weight is also, we're going to be using that a lot. But your 6 weights, maybe a lot of you don't have 8 weights. Your 6 weights are going to be good. Your stiff 5 weights or your fast action 5 weights also will let you throw woolly buggers and baby whitey, usually with no problem. Chad, I'll go through my favorite line, and you can talk about yours. Or I have 2, really. The Rio Outbound Short is a great line for throwing leaders in the clear intermediate, or they're floating even in their different sink rates. But that head and the Rio Outbound Short's awesome. And so is the Orvis Bank Shot. Both of those are just super good streamer, more towards the heavy streamer lines that we use.
Yeah. I fished 3 different lines this spring. I definitely like the Rio Outbound Short. I did fish the Orvis Bank Shot as well, and I tried out the Orvis Cold Water line this spring as well. And that's a little bit heavier line, heavier head to throw streamers too. And, after fishing it a couple times, it straightened out better for me, and I had better success with it. But I think that's a good option for cold water, cold weather streamer fishing.
Mm-hmm. The Helios 2 is an awesome rod. And we've both been throwing that, and it is on the upper end as far as price goes, but you are going to get a very quality product when you buy it. There are so many excellent rods on the market that it's hard to just... I would never say one rod, this is the best. But I cast one rod at an event this weekend that's finished here in America. Graphite rod from the Fluke Company, and I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, Mike with Flute Rod, you played with that rod a lot and loved it. Mike's doing a great job.
Yeah. We could go on with rods forever, and our good friends over at Blue Halo are kind of leading the charge in that fiberglass market as far as I'm concerned, and they've got some really cool products, and a lot of guys love the feel of glass.
Yeah, Courtney's working on a 7 weight that's going to be great for streamers. I don't know if those are for sale yet or not, Jason, but you've casted that. I've played with it a bit. That's going to be a great fiberglass rod for guys that want to chuck big flies.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, excuse me there. You got major manufacturer, type, the rods that everybody knows and a lot of people have. I would call them the big 6. You can figure out who they are. They all make really good rods, but we have both really enjoyed the Helios too. And you've even played with the Orvis Recon.
Yeah, I have that in a 6-weight, and I'll throw baby whitey on that rod, and it works great for that smaller. Well, smaller to us. That's still a big fly, generally speaking.
Yeah.
Jason, one other, I think, lesson learned that we're taking away from this spring, and we kind of referenced, when you get to where you're fishing, you don't always know what fly line you might want to use that day. One thing Orvis offers that I think is great, and I'm sure other reel companies do too, is you can just buy the extra spool. And you and I have a couple extra spools on order, so you can just pop those on to your reel and your rod if you decide, hey, I want to switch out to a floating line versus my intermediate or my sinking line.
Yeah. It's just handy to have, and not as expensive as a full reel. And on the note with lines again, Chad, I mean, because you should have 3. That's what I feel, but that's expensive, and it's very hard for people, and it takes a lot of resources to be able to buy 3 reels or reel 3 spools, 3 lines. And in some cases, I even carry 6. It just depends on all the conditions that we're going to eat that day. But my recommendation would be to have an intermediate line for lakes, because it's a good medium between the full sinks and the floating. A lot of times you're going to be in the deeper water, and the intermediate line, depending on your leader length, is going to let you get to the fish to wherever they are. Might take a long time in the summer to get down to where the fish are. You might need to weight your fly, but it's going to be probably the best line for the conditions year round.
Yeah.
It'll at least get you in the game, better. And so my recommendation is to go with the intermediate.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, if you only want to carry one line, or maybe your budget doesn't allow you to pick up everything that you want, intermediate's a good way to go to start.
Yes.
For sure.
And if you're just starting, take some black woolly buggers, maybe some olive or maroon even, maybe some gray. Take an assortment with you. You're going to have a really good chance of hooking up a fish. If you're a little bit more experienced caster and you've thrown weighted flies before, try one of our baby whiteys. You can order them online, or if you're a fly tyer, you can buy the heads online and make your own version. You can make your own baby whitey or come up with something totally new. At Mount Kiwi, one of the gentlemen that we work with in Montana came up with the Kiwi Sparkler Fly tied with the baby whitey head, and it's dynamite. Might be the most effective fly tied with a drop jaw fly head. A lot of guys used that fly this summer or this spring and late winter up in Montana, and they just ripped it up with it. Fishtails Outfitting and at Instagram at Mount Kiwi, these 3 guys, at Fly Tosser 30 also had a lot of success. I'm missing so many others, Chad. Please forgive me, guys.
There's tons, and we appreciate all the pictures that are coming in. We try to post as many as we can on our Instagram page, but those boys in Montana just killed it this past winter, spring.
And yeah, for some real unique flies, at RBTech1 on Instagram, that's his name. We also work with him, and he has come up with that Senorita Wrasse fly with this drop jaw fly head. And today he just put out a new one, his flying fish fly. That's just that thing is so awesome, and it's with the baby whitey fly head. So you guys can order those heads and tie up your own versions and go try them out. They have a cool action, and they look like a fish. We've caught a lot of fish on these, so give them a try.
Absolutely. Jason, any parting tips, thoughts in regards to spring fishing?
Find the water that has some depth and that's going to warm up the quickest. find the fish with your retrieve and the combination of your fly, vary it up until you get that hookup. Repeat that same process and see if you get another hookup. And then just keep doing that same thing until you don't get a hookup. Then you need to go back and start over again. Maybe go deeper, maybe change your fly. But keep in mind, you've got to keep varying up your techniques and your presentation. Presentation means fly, leader, and line, and your retrieve. So keep varying things until you find what works, and stick with what works until it stops working. Then go back and start over again.
Awesome. Well said. Springtime is such a fun time to get out and hook up fish, chase those hungry fish. So
can't wait. Get back out there.
That's right.
Chad, just one last thing. I just want to give a shout out to Brighton Anglers and those others who organized that river cleanup on the lower Provo, because you and I cleaned up a huge garbage bag full of stuff in a small area. And some guys hauled out a canoe and like a barrel full of slippers that the kids lose when they go tubing down that river. There was so much trash there, and it was so awesome to be part of that event and be able to clean up that area. We also met some really cool people. Like you mentioned, we met Mike from Flute Rods. We met the Broxton.
Yep.
And we met Tug Life Trio at Tug Life Trio. They have some really cool photos on their Instagram page. Was it Jesse?
Yeah, Jesse.
Yeah. So good to meet all of you guys there. And hope you guys will continue to watch us and support us. And it was just really awesome meeting the people and participating in that event. Hats off to Captain Winkler at Captain Winkler and Brighton Anglers to put that together.
For sure. That was a great event. I mean, a little disappointing seeing how much trash we found in such a short area, but shout out to all the local anglers here that showed up to such a great event. And if you want to see how much garbage we found that morning, go to Brighton Anglers Instagram page. And he posted pictures of trash bag after trash bag and literally probably 300 flip-flops.
Yeah, guys, why can people not pick up their trash when they go to such a beautiful place? Please just take a garbage bag with you or a grocery bag and put your garbage in it. If your sandal or something comes off your foot, please make every effort to get that. I'm sure people do, and they,
Yeah. But kudos to the whole angling industry. I think we're representing well, doing these river cleanups. This one was here local, and I know there's others going on across the country, different rivers, different lakes. Just representing the whole fishing community well. So.
Yeah, well said, Jen. Yeah.
All right, friends. Thanks for listening to the Drop Jaw Flies podcast. We'd love to hear your feedback. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, or our website, www.dropjawflies.com. Please subscribe to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, or our YouTube channel. Now get out there and hook a big one and stick 'em solid.